Hi, I'm Sandra Miller. This is my first video. If you like it, let me know. Maybe I'll make another. I know there are some people out there who will appreciate hearing from me right now as we anticipate the coming weeks and the spreading of the Omicron variant of COVID. My apologies in advance if this comes across decidedly unpolished, but delay is not something that works in a situation like we are facing. So here it is, and I hope you find it useful. One caveat before diving in: I'm not a medically trained doctor. Please use this information for your education. I'll be including as many links to research and resources as I can in the comments below, but I may have to add to that list after uploading the video sometime after that, as time is of the essence. And it is usually my profession for me to suggest talking with your own doctor further if you have any concerns, especially if you're suffering from a medical condition or are taking any medication. For those who don't know me, I'm a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. The short explanation of what that means would be to simply say that I find non-medical ways to improve health. My strategy is to help people remove the barriers to proper functioning of the body whilst adding in supports to that proper functioning. And when we do those things, we find that the body has a remarkable capacity to essentially fix itself, find equilibrium or homeostasis, and this leads to good health and reduction in symptoms. I've been watching the Omicron story unfold, and I want so much for people to more fully appreciate how much it is in their control to support their immune systems. I'm going to concentrate on ways to improve immune system status as quickly and cheaply as possible. These strategies are useful for you if you want to protect yourself from COVID itself. They are also useful if you're about to have your booster jab, because they will encourage a more robust response to that, which is likely to lead to more effective vaccine-induced protection. Now, I'm going to mention quite a few different things, and I don't want for that to be overwhelming, but rather provide you with plenty of options to explore, so that however you find yourself placed right now, there are bound to be at least some things you can see your way to having a go at doing as soon as possible. I think it will become clear that there are some ways of tackling the disease of COVID that kind of rise to the top, as it were. But let's wait to see what those are as the story unfolds, as it were. So I think that's probably enough of an introduction. Let's look at each of 5 areas where we can gain better health and immune system function. The first letter of each category spells out the word dress to help make it memorable. These categories are diet, rest, exercise, stress reduction, and supplementation. Okay, first letter, D, diet. This section may be full of reminders, perhaps, rather than new information for some watchers, but the food and drink we consume really do have a massive impact on how the body is able to perform. So let that reminder inspire you. The main thing I could say is that encapsulates so much of what is important in terms of diet is to have a whole food diet. That is simply real food as much as you can, with a balance of those macronutrients, the protein, the complex carbohydrates, and the natural fats, preferably all 3 of those at all meals, and as many snacks as you're able to as well. Limiting sugar and alcohol undoubtedly help. I realise it is also Christmas, so do what you can without making the festive season miserable. Like with food, opt for smaller amounts of the really good stuff. That something that is actually made out of real food is likely to cost a little more, but have a small amount of the real thing and take time to savor these things rather than kind of knock them back unthinkingly. Please eat your fruits and vegetables. Now, Traditional festive food includes sprouts and clementines. So maybe we have no excuses. I'm hoping so. So yeah, it's not rocket science. It's probably nothing you haven't heard before, but let it be a reminder that there are some simple swaps you can probably make along the way to eat something real rather than something that is much more synthetic and comes from a factory, is much more processed. If you're a bit peckish, grab a clementine rather than another mince pie. I'm just saying that that kind of thing is going to build up, and it's going to add up and kind of play in your favour. Moving on to R and rest. Now, sleep. Again, I hope this isn't completely party pooper, but getting to sleep by 10 p.m. is actually incredibly powerful. There was a lady, Ellen White, I believe from the US in the 1800s. She coined the phrase about how 2 hours of sleep before midnight is like getting 4 hours of sleep after midnight. And she really has not been proved wrong since. The power of an early night is huge. There's even been a study done in the last few months to show that you will get an impaired immune response to the vaccine if you don't sleep well the night before it is administered. So that's where some of these things can come into play to help us get that really quality antibody response to be as best protected by that vaccine as possible. And sleep is one of them. There are a few things you can do to encourage this kind of bedtime routine, so that you don't end up trying to do the right thing by going to bed early, only to find that you lay awake. So blocking blue light is a big one, something you might have heard about, but basically it means not using screens the hour before bed ideally, and dimming lighting. Even our warm white lighting often has those blue, the blue spectrum of light within it. It's just got these other things added, so the net effect is that it's a warm colour. So we need to be careful about all sources of light that are not natural, basically. And the reason for this is because blue light shuts off the production of melatonin in the brain, and the melatonin is a hormone that tells your body it's time for sleep. Choose genuinely wind down activities in that hour before bed when you're limiting screen time. Basically, whatever works for you. But I'm planning on reading a novel over Christmas. That would be my Christmas treat. And while many of us are in the habit of thinking that TV is relaxing, it's actually quite stimulating and not helpful for winding down just before bed. So, and you might have had this effect yourself when you've felt maybe a little bit sleepy, but maybe not kind of ready for bed, just winding down, feeling relaxed, and then kind of woken yourself up by watching TV, and now you're not really ready for bed. Well, that's that stimulating effect kicking in. And I know I've tripped up myself like that. Another thing to help your body get the right cues during the latter part of the day to build up to sleep time and feeling ready for bed is to eat your last meal at least 3 hours before bed. But you might find that a very small high protein and fat snack, so I'm talking a little handful, little palmful of nuts might work well there. Nuts and seeds can really help kind of bring back on track some wayward blood sugar levels and help keep those even throughout the night, which in itself is massive for helping to allow for great sleep. One of those things, when we wake up in the night feeling like your brain's rushing and you can't wind down, there's a stress response going on, and that can be as a result of all manner of things. But one of them, and one of the very common ones, is definitely a little spike in blood sugar. And this can be one little strategy that might hit it on the head for you to help get those blood sugar levels not spiking cortisol in the night when you want to be asleep and not having stimulatory cortisol running through your blood. One huge help in getting to bed at a good time is exposure to sun. first thing in the morning. Now, I'm doing this on the shortest day of the year. I know there's not much sun and not much warmth to entice us out there at the moment, but if you have a dog, you can walk in earlier in the day rather than later. This is the kind of thing that you can do for great effect. Perhaps consider taking a blanket to wrap up outside on the patio for your first cuppa of the day. I'm just aiming high here. You don't have to do this. As I say, just if you were going to go for a walk anyway during the festive period, do it earlier in the day rather than later, because this early morning natural light exposure helps set that clock ticking on your internal circadian rhythm so that you're wanting to hit the hay at the right time later on in the evening. Okay, we've got to E, and exercise. You'll be pleased to know that this really doesn't need to mean hitting the gym. Sometimes the right strategy is actually to scale back on an intense exercise routine, which can actually suppress the immune system by jacking up the cortisol levels, which, if they stay high over a period of time, that in itself suppresses the immune system. So walking is a superb and greatly underrated form of exercise. It's great. It's low impact for beginners. If you're holding a little bit more weight than you would like, it's easy on the joints. It's great for all, almost all levels of fitness. So yoga is likewise gentle and effective, and in the interest of keeping this really free and as low cost as possible, you'll find some great yoga routines with Adrienne. That's Adriene. She's got a whole YouTube channel, loads of stuff uploaded there. She's got a lovely manner. I, for instance, love her routine for neck and shoulders. If I'm getting tense, I love that for unwinding that stress in that particular area of my body, but also it just generally makes me feel hugely relaxed to stop and just focus and take time to do something slowly. The breathing that's associated with it is really helpful as well. So the whole thing is wonderful. Stress reduction, S. We've got to the first S. Okay, this section is kind of a biggie, and it might get a bit weird and wonderful for some people, but stick with me and see what you think. There may be some things that are new to you that you can try. Again, I'm really focusing in on what is quick to incorporate because it's cheap and accessible. But first, before I do, just to help draw you into my weird and wonderful world, let me describe to you, explain to you what I mean by hormesis, which is an amazing concept and something we make use of when we talk about stress reduction, and use the example of exercise to do so. So hormesis is this idea that actually our bodies are designed to thrive on a little bit of the right amount of stress, and that's why I use exercise as an example of something that we'd be familiar with. We all understand that exercise actually places a bit of stress on the body. It's hard work. You can end up feeling fatigued and a little bit achy in the muscles afterwards. This is all because it's actually hard work. Our bodies have to push themselves in some way to achieve that exercise. Now, there's a right level, there's a sweet spot. Not enough, only holding ourselves upright on a sofa is clearly not enough exercise. Too much where you try to do a marathon without having done any exercise, to use some extremes, that's clearly going to end up in injury, and it's not a good form. However, great exercise is in general, and we know this to be true on so many levels, experientially and from the studies. Doing too much is not going to be good. So to get that right amount is really crucial to gaining the benefit from exercise. That's hormesis. It's the stress at the right level in the right way for you, for where you're at, to just kind of give your system a bit of a kick up the backside, basically. It makes you It drives the body out of a mode of being which is very efficient, which says, hey, you know, if you're not going to use these muscles at the moment, then there's no real need for me to build them up. And so you don't get that increased muscle tone unless you use the muscles. So this is all very, very similar, and hopefully a kind of concept that you can come back to when I start talking about things. You think, like, what is she going on about? Bring it back to this example of exercise and hormesis, and hopefully it will make a bit more sense to you. Okay, one thing similar to exercise, again, remember to go slowly with these things, like you would with a new exercise regime. Go at your own pace. That's really, really important. It's also a study in learning to listen to your body, your own feedback mechanism. The body is amazing at telling you what it needs more of, what it needs less of. We need to actively engage in listening in on that to get better at hearing from ourselves. Like hunger and thirst are obviously very clear and well known mechanisms of that feedback, but they are seriously only the tip of the iceberg on that. So practice tuning in on your body in that regard, and you'll be amazed at what it's actually able to tell you about how much is enough and what is too much. Okay. First of all, breathing. This is so much bigger than I appreciated. I've been recommending breathing techniques for many years, but I've been doing some more research lately. I think there's a wealth of research coming into view, a kind of public view, and I've certainly come across it and been really impressed. So to give you a quick rundown, I would say look at the Wim Hof website. For instance, just to give you a brief introduction, the list of benefits that Wim Hof gives on his website for breathing techniques, as he would describe them, would be stress reduction, faster recovery from physical exertion, better sleep, improved sports performance, enhanced creativity, more focus and mental clarity. And this is one of the links that I will give you in the comments. So Wim Hof's website, you could search for it yourself anyway. And he gives a brief introduction of background information, and also a guided video on how to try it out yourself. If you can't hold your breath for that complete period of time, as Wim Hof says during the video anyway, don't push it, but do what you can do. That's actually something I do every day myself. Go through that video that's embedded in that page, and you'll see, if you explore that website further, that these breathing techniques have also been associated with the remission of autoimmune disorders. And just to develop that last thought a little more, there's a YouTube link that I'll give for an interview between Dr. Rangan Chatterjee, who is a UK GP, when he interviews James Nestor, who has written a fabulous book all about breathing. And they talk about the remission of autoimmune disorders and so much more during that interview. It's well worth a watch. I think I'll leave it there for now. There's loads of resource for you to explore more, but from my personal experience and that of many others, it is a very quick way to feel better in the moment, and over a period of time. I notice if I haven't done it for a few days, let's put it that way, and it's 11 minutes of my day well worth spending on doing that. Okay, heat exposure. Okay, so you'll be aware of saunas, Finnish saunas, and before you freak out that you say, well, I don't have access to a gym with a sauna, well, neither do I. And while I would love to have a cedar wood sauna in my home, that's not something I have access to. I'll explain a little in a little while what I do have access to, which is kind of a mid-range sort of expense. But the reality is actually even just having a hot bath, so bringing your body temperature up enough to sweat, this is the key, would be an accessible and inexpensive way to start getting those benefits. In terms of research, I'm going to do a link to the Fur Zone studies. This is a page that's actually a bit out of date, and there's a wealth of much more current information, but it's this particular page, outdated though it is, has so much resource on it. It would be crazy not to link to that, because it also shows the particular product that I personally do use. So it's portable, somewhat portable, definitely easy to fold away. I do so on a daily basis, and the footprint on the floor is about 1 meter square, and probably it goes up about 1 meter or so as well. So we're talking about 1 meter cube roughly when it's up and out and in use, and it works very well. So yeah, that's a quick way to do it. And I'm not promoting that product particularly. I'm just saying that's a way that I have found for achieving this regularly, that has been affordable for me, where, you know, a lovely, as I say, cedar wood sauna is out of my scope, but hot baths are definitely a way to start there. And they, if you look at the research, there's loads of research, and you will find also mention made of that in an interview with a very qualified clinician who has dealt with COVID in an emergency scenario over the last months, years, and I will be linking to him shortly, but he talks about this as well. Okay, so next thing is cold exposure. Now, I will refer back to Wim Hof on this in the comments with the link to his information on cold exposure. He has done offered himself up for some amazing scientific studies, and he does give details on his website about them. Do look at those. But I'll briefly just try to give you a window into his one on endotoxin. So this is something, an endotoxin, it's a toxin that will reliably make people sick, you know, like for a few days, high temperature, lethargy, you know, feeling really, really groggy, that kind of level of unwellness. And he was able, with his techniques, to actually produce an immune response against the endotoxin, such that he was not made sick by it at all, even when it was injected straight into his bloodstream, which is just not deemed possible, basically. He took it one level further and said that he could take a group of very ordinary 12 people who'd never done this stuff before, and if he had them for a period of 4 days, trained them up, he did a bunch of stuff with cold exposure, took them up a Polish mountain, I believe, and did all his cold exposure training with them over those 4 days, then they were able to replicate those results as well. Whereas the group of, I can't remember now, over 1,000 people, when they were exposed to the endotoxin, they, as would be thought of as reliable, got sick in the usual way. So I've really glossed over this ever so quickly. Look at his website for more details. It's fascinating, especially when he tells it. The website does give loads of scientific data as well as anecdotal. What I would say is, if you want to do more of this, try the Wim Hof app. You will get a lot of free usage off that initially. It will start asking you to pay if you want to do more. That's fine if you would like to. But I found just using the free stuff was a great stepping stone to kind of just get started. And what you can do, and he often, I've heard in lots of different interviews between women, other people, he basically, the end point that end recommendation he gets to is to, on a daily basis, Start with a warm to a hot shower and then gradually build up until you feel able to be exposed to a cold shower for 2 minutes on a daily basis. So again, you just go gently. Don't try to do 2 minutes the first time. Go gently, and you will get to a point where it never feels entirely easy, but you get used to the initial shock. You get used to subjecting yourself to that initial shock, and yeah, once you've got over the initial shock, it's actually not too bad. So I do this myself, and yeah, it's okay. But I definitely feel like the reason I'm able to do this for 2 minutes on a daily basis is because I started slowly and built up and didn't push it. Okay, so I kind of feel like a section on stress reduction is not really complete without mentioning meditation and mindfulness, but it's something that we've heard a lot about already, kind of in this sort of natural health arena. And I kind of feel like these other things, these other modalities have a massive impact for really quite quickly making a big difference. That's not to say I'm writing off meditation and mindfulness at all. Apps like Calm and Headspace are quite well known now, and so I'll leave you to explore those on your own. I felt like these other things are powerful and not so well known and needed flagging up. Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting, because the second S is for supplements, and so in particular I want to talk about vitamins D and K2. So the older training, and certainly the training that I would have had just in my academic training, would be very much emphasizing that as a fat soluble vitamin, it's really important not to overdose on vitamin D, and that is still true, but I think I know that my thinking has developed so that when I did my training for being a practitioner, I became aware that certainly much larger doses were important. We need to move away from the very conventional recommendations, which are really still bedded in staving off rickets. We want to stave off quite a lot of other disease, and more than that, not just stave off disease, we want optimal health. So that definitely will involve much higher levels than we see quoted by the NHS, basically. And I would have, I think, until sort of the last few months, even the last couple of months, been very cautious to recommend regular testing as well. And I still recommend testing. It's actually quite affordable and accessible. But the reality is that the information that I've now come across from clinicians, from doctors who have used this, and certainly in the last few months, and very safely and very effectively, has made me rethink some of that. So I feel more free to pass on those recommendations to you, and make those suggestions a bit more boldly. It's worth realizing that in the UK, and this will obviously be true in many parts of the world, it's only actually between the months of May and September that there's even enough sunlight for us to be possible to make enough vitamin D from sunlight. And that assumes that we're actually going to expose our skin enough to that for enough of the day to make that possible. Of course, we mustn't forget about dietary sources. They do help, but sunlight exposure is where we should normally get the massive amount of the most of it. And if we can't do that, then supplementation is our friend. So dietary sources, yes, we need a whole food diet rich in naturally fatty foods. But we will also be aware that people on a low fat or vegan diet where they don't supplement are going to be at additional risk to low vitamin D status. I'm going to be linking to Dr. Rangan Chatterjee, who is a GP in the UK, where he interviews a highly qualified doctor in many disciplines, including emergency care. And he was forced, the latter doctor was forced to rethink the care he was giving his patients because of COVID. And you can hear more about his kind of journey, but also he talks a lot about vitamin D. He also talks about cold therapy and heat therapy and a whole bunch of other things that we've talked about as well, including diet and rest. So he's well worth a listen to. And he and many other people talk about getting 4,000 international units of vitamin D a day, quite reasonably and quite safely. And this should be paired with 200 micrograms daily of vitamin K2, which by doing that, we avoid the calcium mobilization and deposition in tissues where it shouldn't be deposited, to have that K2 vitamin D combination. And there is a ton of research now. Just one paper that I want to flag up to you is a research paper published in October of this year, so only 2 months old. And I will read the title of this, which is COVID-19. Mortality risk correlates inversely with vitamin D3 status, and a mortality rate close to zero could theoretically be achieved at 50 nanograms per milliliter of D3. Results of a systemic review and meta-analysis. So the shorthand for this is basically, if you are able to supplement in such a way to raise your blood level to this level of 50 nanograms per milliliter, you're close to a zero risk of dying from COVID. This is massive, absolutely massive. We know now that vitamin D influences more than 2,500 genes. And this involvement in gene transcription may explain why some of those effects take a while to kick in, because we need gene transcription. We need to kind of copy and produce genes, and then we've got protein synthesis. So there's a downstream effect that takes a little bit of time. So it's worth building up your vitamin D levels in advance of being unwell, as well as taking it whilst you are unwell. Now, this is what I use. It's Better You 3,000 IU of vitamin D with K2. The K2 is 75 nanograms per micrograms, of vitamin K2 per dose. Now, I'm not suggesting to use this over and above anything else. Use whatever you through your own research deem to be acceptable. The reason I use this is because the Better You sprays are quite good for bypassing the digestive system. You will get more of the product, more of the active ingredient getting into the system because it goes through the mucosa of the mouth. I also chose it just because if any of us does get ill, particularly the children, this will be easy to take even when feeling poorly and potentially going off food. Okay, so if you do end up using something that is a capsule or a tablet, definitely you want to be taking that alongside some fatty food with a meal that contains fat, or a snack that contains fat, because otherwise you won't, the fat soluble nature of it will mean that you won't actually be able to absorb this fat soluble vitamin. All right, let's look at zinc. This is another thing that has been shown, and I will again do the links. There's a 2-minute 50 clip of the interview between Dr. John Campbell and a GP called Dr. Cohen, and that just gives you a little snippet and will just give you a feel for his experience with it, where Dr. Cohen has been treating at least 2,000 patients and been telling them all, recommending to them all, that they take these doses, this combo at these doses, the vitamin K, the vitamin K2, the vitamin D3, and the zinc. And obviously this is, nobody would suggest otherwise, but this is just a very rudimentary evidence. But the truth is, in those 2,000 patients, hopefully many of whom followed his advice, he's only had a handful of those who felt bad enough with COVID to go and visit A&E. None of those people were admitted, and none of those people have died. So that obviously isn't enough information to convince anybody of anything, but it is very compelling and it's very encouraging. And I think it deserves a space alongside, of course, the more scientifically validated stuff, which we do also have. Now, I'm going to give a link to the whole interview between John Campbell and Dr. Cohen, because that makes for a really interesting listen and watch as well. But it is somewhat longer and will take you a bit more time. So again, I'll show you what it is I've been using lately. These are gummies, they're sweet and they are chewable. And again, I'm not endorsing this over anything else by any means. I would take it with food again, but the reason I chose this is, again, if particularly the children get unwell, this has a high chance of being consumed by them even when they are not feeling particularly great. So what we've seen with the zinc, I think Dr. Cohen, if I remember rightly, he kind of says that's more important to take maybe up to the 25 microgram. Oh, I have to be careful of my units there. I have to check. It's microgram. Yeah, that's micrograms. It's more important to take that level when you're feeling actively unwell, because it kicks in quite quickly. So it's more helpful in that way. Whereas the vitamin D, great for taking long term, and not that this can't be taken long term, but you wouldn't want to take it long term in anything higher than 25 micrograms because of the way it will impede absorption of copper. It will compete with copper, so that's not a good thing long term. Okay, so I would love for people to go and dive into these interviews, the research. They are amazing and so worth listening to and watching, to get a bit more background feeling on the thrust behind these things, because these are really knowledgeable people with clinical training, clinical experience, who are endorsing these things. And so don't just take it on my say so, but if I can be a signpost to you looking into this and getting educated on it yourself from other people, that is superb as far as I'm concerned. So going back to kind of what I set out to do in conclusion, I just don't want you to feel like you're a sitting duck. I don't think there's any need to. I want you to feel like there are things that you can validly do to enhance your immune system that will make a difference and can make a difference really quite quickly and cheaply. And I think something that really stands out for me is this vitamin D research. It's really so compelling, especially with this 2-month-old study now, making it clear that if you take enough to get that blood level up to standard, which by the way is way higher than you will be if you've had a vitamin D check from your doctor. It can be a lot lower than that, and you can still be told it's normal, by the way. So ask for the numbers if you've had a recent one, because it needs to be up to that level of 50, I forget the units, nanograms per milliliter, to have this level of efficacy of staving off mortality and making that essentially zero. I think that's very compelling. And yeah, the weight of clinicians who've actually used this for COVID, and now the studies and the scientists who have studied it with respect to COVID is fantastic. And let's not overlook it. Let's use it. Let's use it and feel less frightened and less scared. I don't think there's any need to use it to your benefit. I hope you found this helpful.